Christianity, true Christianity, is very dangerous to systems. Christ never told us to get into a safe cage.
They wanted to know how one can strengthen their faith. The top two things that came out: read the Bible alone and pray alone. Vast majority of Americans have never read the Bible. If our charge is to make disciples of all nations, you have to really step out of the institution to do that.
What is happening is broke, in my opinion. And part of what's broke is the corruption around money.
The religious system in America has become the playground for corruption from a corporation standpoint. They do not need to file any document with the federal government or the IRS that they can be legally held to account for. You know, remember in 1913, there was only 12,000 organizations. There's 1.9 million nonprofits in the US now. Let's map that against population increase. If we kept those numbers similar, it'd be about 45,000 nonprofits today.
Follow the money. Where is the money going? That tells you the entire story.
30%. So one out of every $3 goes to something that even looks remotely like a church. There's just no legal accountability that a religious institution is held to account for. And so we always say humans will human. And so that's the religion business in a nutshell.
What's up, Ordinary Discussions? Welcome back to the show. Today's guests are pulling back the curtain on one of the most powerful and untouchable institutions in our culture, which is the church. They're producers of the explosive docuseries Religion Business and the founders of Broken Shepherds. Their work has exposed corruption, greed, and outright theft disguised as ministry. And they haven't been afraid to challenge the establishment that would rather keep many of these stories hidden. The conversation isn't about sugarcoating faith. It's about confronting the abuse of it. And we're going to dive deep into the money trails, the manipulation, and the systems that protect the wolves while the sheep are left vulnerable. We're going to ask questions that church leaders oftentimes, at least in the docuseries, do not want to answer. I'm not saying all church leaders, but in the docuseries for sure. So guys, make sure you listen in. This was going to be a really powerful conversation around money in the church. So you're definitely going to want to listen to this podcast. It'll be a great show. Thanks so much for always listening, subscribing, liking what we have. Please leave comments. It's great to hear from you. And it also helps us in the algorithm, getting the word of the gospel and the good news of Christ out. Hey, thanks so much. Enjoy the show. Let's do this. What's up, guys? Nathan and Chris, how are you guys?
Great, brother. It's awesome to be here with you, man.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Man, it is so great to have you. I said it earlier, but I feel like I already know you guys from watching the docuseries. So what is, let's just jump into it. So we're going to talk a lot about it, but we'll give you an opportunity to promo it because you should. But what is this docuseries Religion Business, and what is it about?
Yeah, the docuseries, it's a 7-part docuseries. Runtime is about 6.5 hours. So you're going to need to set aside some time. So thank you, Jeremy, for setting aside that time. I do think it's amazing. Educational. Yeah, I think it's worth the 6.5 hours. Oh, yeah. But it looks at the legal architecture in the U.S. that has created what we would call a modern religious institution. Not necessarily Christianity. This could be Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, doesn't matter. All religions play by the same guidelines and the same rules here in the US. And so the show looks at those guidelines and rules and then profiles through precedent and lobbying major loopholes that have kind of just come about over the last 100 years. And so the church that Chris went to, or the institution that Chris went to, and the institution I grew up in and you grew up in, Jeremy, they all look different. So it's how do these different institutions mirror each other intimately? And then how does the abuse patterns, and I'll call it abuse, in the systems kind of run through everything? And it comes down to there's just no legal accountability that a religious institution is held to account for. And so we always say humans will human. And, if there's an opportunity to benefit yourself, you're going to end up doing it, even if you don't know you're doing it. And so that's the religion business in a nutshell.
Absolute power, absolutely corrupt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. So there's no reason to dance around it. Let's just jump right into it. I would say it's fascinating, unbelievable topic. I know you guys have gotten a lot of pushback. Chris and Nathan, I'm sure that some people now hate you that didn't hate you before. It's interesting when you expose the truth that when you're on the right side of truth, you love it, and when you're on the wrong side of it, you hate it, right? And so kudos to you guys for having the guts to do this. I mean, I have a lot of the same desires and yearnings that you do, and to be honest with you, at times it's like, how do you say it without people? So that's a question. How do you do what you're doing without people thinking that you hate the church, or that you hate God, or you hate pastors? I mean, because that's what people will try to say, right?
Yeah, you just Jesus said, "Pick up the cross and follow me." Right? Pick up your cross and follow me, and that's it's a very scary thing. There's so much unknown that's there, and you put a lot at risk, and there's just so much unknown, right? And you start getting heat from all sorts of places and being accused of hating the church when we love the body of Christ. I'm proud to be a member of it.
Yeah, for sure.
I had a great conversation yesterday with an individual, and he said, okay, I said, what is a church? And he goes, there's only one church. And so he goes, if I ever hear someone say I'm starting a church, he goes, you ain't starting the church that you think you're starting them, because there's only one church, right? And so we had this great, you just went straight into it. I'm going to go straight into it. This guy is fascinating. He speaks Greek, Hebrew, not a pastor. People come up to him and they're like, you're a pastor. Can you pastor me? And he goes, I'm not a pastor. I just work in the real world, but I want to steward the scriptures and help people in their faith. And so I'm like, man, we had a 2-hour conversation, and I said, I'm having a really hard time defining what is this institution we've built, right? Because if we agree that there's only one church and Christ is the head, then what is we don't go to church at that point. We are the church. What is the building? What is the stage? What is the coffee and donuts? What's the childcare? Like, what could we call that to put a label on it? And he kind of chuckled. And I've asked this question to 1,000 people. So
I was going to ask it to you. So I'm glad you're answering it now. Yeah.
So I've always said it's just an institution. And he goes, Nathan, this is my favorite one. Chris, I haven't even told you this. He goes, it's a love den. And I said, a what? And he goes, it's a love den. We've created a love den for ourselves. We walk in, we get filled, we sing worship that makes us emotionally feel good. We get to drop our kids off. Someone else teaches them. We get to grab a cup of coffee and feel good. If you're the pastor, you get, your ego boosted and your pride kicked because you're giving this beautiful, presentation. If you're in the worship band, you get to play and you get, filled up with kind of that. It feels good to be on the stage. And he goes, we've misrepresented worship and we've reclassified these terms. And so all that is a love den. And sure, a broken clock is right twice a day, but it's a love den of self. And he goes, Christ told us to be the opposite of that. He told us to be sacrificial and to pick up our cross daily. And instead we've created this love den where, hey, I'm going to go and get loved on and be loved on. And it's a love den. So it's a place where, it's a broad brush, but I love the definition of a love den because I'm like, it's true. I go and I feel good when I leave, but what have I done to be a beneficial part of that system? Especially if I'm in the pews. Christ called us to be a part of the body, a living and acting and an engaged part of that body. And he goes, if I'm sitting in that pew, I am not engaged. I am not active. I am not adding outside of financial resources to this system. And so it's a love den, man.
Well, if it's a love den, then what should it be? What is it? I mean, what is the church? Church. This is a great question because Alex Rossi is our COO, and we talk about this all the time. Like, what is it? It's not the announcements and then a prayer and then a sermon and then the prayer. Like, but what is it? I have my opinions, but I want to hear
the true body. That ecclesia is an organism, and it's actually an organism that can move through systems. And so I don't think that early church, I'm always fascinated with that early church because how did it transform Rome, right? Christ didn't go to Caesar and say, Caesar, let's sit down with you and force my moral code down onto everybody. He didn't care. He started at the bottom because he knew his message was organic to the point where it would move through systems. And I always use the analogy of slavery because a lot of people will say if they want to push against Christianity, they'll say, hey, Christ never came out and said slavery is bad, and he didn't go to Caesar and say slavery is wrong, stop having slaves. And it's because he knew his message in the true church was an organic organism that would move through the system and solve that problem. And that's how I see the church is face to face. It's this where I get to see Christ radiating off of you and in you, and that light hits me back. And anything else is not the church. So whether that be my neighbor is in need, or my brother is in need, or you are in need, emotionally, financially, spiritually, you name it, I am there for you. And it's this, the goal of the church is to raise humanity to another level and show them Christ. Because Christ, and I'm always fascinated with this, Christ never said, hey, worship me, Nathan. Christ never said that. He said, hey, follow me.
Yeah.
And so that is the church, when a group of believers are actively following Christ. And I did a simple post yesterday. Then your resources, your time, your skill sets, everything is right with you to expand the kingdom and present the gospel to the true gospel to the world. And so I think the church, a building, actually kneecaps the true church, because it sets you in that singular spot, and then it kind of it forces you to bring everybody to you. Whereas Paul never said, hey, let's get this building on the street corner and everybody meet there. Paul was running constantly from city to city, and so were those early apostles. And now granted they were planting these gatherings, but they weren't looking for a singular location to say this is it. This is the brand. We'll start it here. So there's a great friend of ours named Matt Frazier who talks about fractals in nature, and how nature is like the church should mirror nature, and nature is fractal based. So it's constantly splitting and multiplying. And the goal of the church is to split and multiply so fast that it just moves into everything. And that's that organic organism and that organic replication. But I saw this yesterday, and you'll get a kick out of this. There was ironically an ARC meetup at the church I was raised in. So the church I was raised in Carlsbad, California. And I took a screenshot of it because it's about launching churches and starting churches. And on the wall behind the pastor on stage, on the projected wall, it says creating buy-in for your church launch. So creating buy-in for Jeremy's church launch. So it's not Christ Church, it's Jeremy's church. It's your church, Jeremy. Yeah. And then you don't even have buy-in yet, bro. So we have to create it for you and build this excitement so you can launch your church. And I found that so ironic and so antithetical to the message of Christ in the true church. But that's I honestly like, what is a church? It's the most fascinating, simple question. And that's why the show starts on it and ends on it.
Yeah. And there's a quote that says, if you make a church, you may get disciples. If you make disciples, you'll always get a church.
Oh, I love that, man.
That's kind of what you're saying, right? It's like, if you make disciples, you always get the church, because you're starting from the bottom down. You're not coming up with a concept and then trying to get buy-in.
Correct.
It's the opposite.
Yeah.
Chris, sorry.
Yeah, I apologize. My phone actually overheated and shut down.
Oh, gosh.
Just from being outside
for you. There you go.
Under shade. Go ahead, brother. Sorry.
Well, I think it was you. It may have been Nathan, but I think it was you. You guys I was listening to a podcast you guys did, and you were talking about the church as a cage. And you gave the analogy of a wild lion that may live 7 years versus a tame lion in a cage that lives 14 years. Could you speak on that a little bit? That
was actually Nathan. He can talk to it, and then I have a question for you on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it boils down to this idea of danger, right? And Christianity, true Christianity, is very dangerous to systems. You look at what it did to Rome. Because it stands outside of politics, it stands outside of institutional structure, because it, like I said, that organism, when Chris was offline, could move through it. And so true Christianity is dangerous. And we're going on a very big podcast in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be launching. And we're going to talk about this very thing. If a government whether that be Rome or America or England, it has a dangerous religion that will shift the whole system potentially. What's the goal of that government? To box it in, put religion in a cage. Because if we could put it in a cage and put it on the shelf, we can control it. And so in 1913, I think with good intentions, the government created the nonprofit sector. It did these religious carve outs, and then it created this 14-point checklist. That 14-point checklist is a literal cage. And they had to dangle a carrot, which is tax exemption. And once you get into that cage, you have to play by the cage's rules. And so that cage is safe, right? I can build a building. We can have nice air conditioning if we're in Arizona, or if we're in Montana in the winter, man, we can have nice heating. We can have a stage, and man, it even says we should have childcare. Like that's one of the 14-point checklists,
Yeah,
and so you go down it, and the cage is safe, protected, understood, and replicatable, but not only in Christianity, but in also Islam. So that's the thing, is Islam plays by the exact same rules now that Christianity plays by in the United States. And so you can get into that cage, and that cage is safe, and you're going to live a long, probably prosperous, as people like to say, life from a business perspective. Christ never told us to get into a safe cage. Mm-mm. He said, you will be in the wild. You will be sheep among wolves.
Yep.
And, 80% of early bishops and apostles for the first 200 years died and were martyred. Like, true Christianity is dangerous because it is an organism that could destroy institutional power and will shift institutional power. And so, it's very interesting when I ask people, are you a Christian? Dan Bramer says something brilliant in the show. He goes, most people have faith in their faith in God, not in the God of their faith. Because if I have faith in my faith, that's me putting faith in the cage. The cage is safe. They help me feel good. They say good things. It's that love den. Man, I get it. This is faith in my faith. But as soon as I put my faith in the God of my faith, that is very dangerous. And you are officially in the wild, because guess what? I might wake up tomorrow and I could believe that God told me, hey, Nathan, sell everything you have and go do X, Y, and Z tomorrow. And if I have faith in the God of my faith, I'm going to do that. Or, hey, Chris, you've worked your butt off to build your financial security net. You're going to throw it all away and build this show called The Religion Business in this app, because guess what? Like, I'm calling you to do that.
Yeah.
And Chris always used to say, and it's ironic that, Chris, you don't say this anymore, and I haven't heard you say it in a while, is Chris on podcasts would go, there's way easier ways to make money than this. You're right. There's way easier ways to make returns on my money. But it's like, Chris, and I'm tipping my hat to you, bro. You no longer even see this as a money-making endeavor. Chris
Correct.
is like, this is my life because God's called me into this. And when you step out into the wild, like just like bow hunting, you step out and you hear those 1,000-pound bulls bugling that could rip you to shreds with their antlers. Like, you are in it, man.
I'm running to it. I'm running after it.
And that was the church, right? It's like, you see those early apostles, and they had no problem. Was it Peter or Philip that was thrown in prison and the angels rattled the cage? They didn't run away from it. They just stayed in jail. They're like, I'm going to sit here, even though I could walk out right now, right. And then guess what? Like, hey, guard, I'm going to talk to you and tell you why we didn't run, and it's like, Christ is antithetical to safety, and organized Christianity lives for safety. But
Chris, I want you to ask your question.
Yeah.
I just want to, just so it's not lost. The idea that I heard that really stuck out to me is you could be a lion and live 14 years in a cage, get fed food every day, or be in the jungles of Africa and live 7 years. Which one are you going to choose? Well, we would all choose to live 7 years in the wild, right? But as believers, we keep choosing this safe cage, like this, but that's not where life is. And it really stuck out to me when you were talking about that.
And one thing that I've talked with a friend about a couple of days ago is, because he's a big advocate of the system. Like he likes the institution, and I'm not going to knock. Like we're just having these healthy discourses.
That's right.
But I'm like, I would be so bummed. I'm 41. If I woke up when I'm 85, hard to move, body's deteriorating, and I'm still sitting hearing the same Christian Christmas story with the same set. It's probably going to be a little bigger. Hearing the same Easter story with that same, big stage. And it means I came back to the same pew for 85 years and did the same thing over and over and over. And I never lived. I never stepped out and became that lion in the wild going, God, how are you going to use me? Break me. And it was just a fascinating discussion because I'm like, man, as a kid, I loved those big. My dad was the flying angel in one of the Christmas pageants. I love it. I was Joseph. It's like with the staff. It's like, but at what point do we say, okay, we're playing in a cage, we're building stages, and we're never risking anything, and that's not what Christ called us to do.
Yeah, Chris, what
well, you're risking 10% of your income. I'll say that. Yeah. So do you think that today's modern church is a matrix?
Who are you asking?
You, brother.
Oh gosh. I don't know what I think it is.
Let's go back to your quote though. Like where you said, what was your quote about disciples?
Yeah. If you make or build a church, you may get disciples. If you make disciples, you always get a church.
Right. So in that, if our charge is to make disciples of all nations, then that like you have to really step out of the institution to do that. Otherwise, you're gonna be in this box because it runs antithetical to the business practices. Because if you leave, the money leaves.
Yeah,
the tide leaves. Yeah.
It's and you guys I don't expect that you would, but you don't know a lot about what we do. But yeah, it's ordinary movement because we believe God has chosen ordinary men and ordinary women to change this world. And it's not it's 1 Corinthians 1:27. He uses the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. And I believe the next revival is going to come from the ordinary people. I would consider you guys, although you're very talented, you're ordinary. You're not seminary degrees. You're not out,
correct,
mega church pastors, right? It's people I believe like us and people across the country that are going to revive this movement. And so everything we do is, I would say, almost counterculture to the big C church today. And so you would say, what is the church? Or is it the matrix? I just feel like the system's broke. And I say that with a little hesitancy because I don't want pastors to think I'm down on that. That's not the point. The point is we really need to think about the system and the process, and what is happening is broke, in my opinion. And something needs to change drastically. And part of what's broke, and this is what we're going to get into this, is the corruption around money and the greed and the rock star pastorism that we see. And by the way, I want to know where you got your shirt at, this anti-prosperity gospel. I want one of those.
It's my buddy. You can go on Instagram. It's Memes for Jesus.
It's a big anti-prosperity gospel club. So, but Chris, you just brought up you just threw a hand grenade in a room and acted like you didn't do it. You said, you said that you risked 10% of your income. Tell me about it. Let's talk about that.
Well, let's talk about that. So, Christ
so
said
nonchalant.
So like, I guess if you look at it, right, this concept of you'll know them by their fruit, right? So that's like, I'll throw that out there. Then we also talk about Jesus Christ saying, render to Caesar what's due to Caesar and give to God what is God's. And then Jesus Christ also says, talks about taking care of the sick, the poor, the prisoner, the marginalized in Matthew 25. And because if you're doing it for them, you're doing it to him.
That's right.
And so follow the money in everything. You have to follow the money. I'm a businessman. Like everything you do, follow the money. Where is the money going? That tells you the entire story. So when you look at that, I'm giving my 10% because I've been told my entire life that that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm giving it to God, right? And so you're risking your own money where in a very dark world. I mean, churches don't turn 990, have to turn 990s in, right?
Yeah, I
and
do.
I asked this, what's that?
I do understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. So how can a tree bear fruit with no light? And that's where you're putting your money. You're risking 10% of your hard-earned money, and it's not bearing fruit. And not in all situations. I'm talking about in many situations.
Yeah, for sure. Especially in the docuseries, people can see that very clearly. Well, it's hard to know exactly where to go here, but let's talk about that 990 issue. Okay, so you mentioned it, Nathan. The government set up some rules where churches don't have to, and a 990, if you could explain to people, is a reporting. They don't have to do that. Other people do. Can you explain that and what that has opened up, the Pandora's box that has opened up?
Yeah, so I'll start with this. Just for your listeners, we got to remember our lifespans are flashes, a moment in time. 80 years, 100 years is a moment in time. So what we see is reality. We kind of think is status quo. So we think, hey, we live in this great free country called America. There's nonprofits that do a lot of social good and churches. This is reality. This reality is less than 120 years old. So in the history of humanity and then in the history of America, this idea of a nonprofit is very new. And so in 1913, the government saw a handful of organizations, 12,000 organizations in 1913, and they were building social capital. So they were the companies and the corporations in their community doing social good, helping the unhoused, helping the migrant, helping the widow, the orphaned. And the government said, hey, we want to create a carve out for this type of corporation where their main mission is to build social capital and raise humanity, do things, and this is the kicker, in their local community that the government could not do. Because we got to remember now, this is before technology, this is before radio, this is before TV, this is before internet. So your world was really what you could see right in front of you. That was it. And then the newspaper that you could pick up. And so nonprofits were defined. And there's a form called the 990, just like a 1099 or a W-2 that you get from your employer. And if you file it with the IRS, with the federal government. And the goal with this particular form, the 990, is it's just an informational sheet. So it's, hey, Jeremy, you have a nonprofit. The government needs something to know how much money you brought in and basically a ballpark of where it's going. And that document is a legally binding document. The government's not asking you for taxes because you don't have to pay any taxes, but it's like, hey, Jeremy, here's a form. Just be honest on it. Be accountable with it. This is also for your donors, so your donors know where your money goes. And this is the kicker. It's a legally binding document. So if Chris, who donates to you, starts feeling like you're being kind of shady, he could complain to the IRS, and the IRS could potentially audit you. And if you get audited, just like a W-2, they will hold you to that document. And if you lied on the document, you're going to be in trouble and pay the consequences.
Got it.
So it's an accountability form. Churches, any religious institution does not have that requirement. So they do not need to file any document with the federal government or the IRS that they can be legally held to account for. If there's no document that you're held to account to, what does that mean? You can get away with almost anything, especially if you have ill intent. Because guess what? I know how to use Excel. I can download a general ledger from my bank or my CPA and tweak it all day long.
Yeah. And
so what it means is I get to present whatever I want to my donors, and there's no true recourse if they raise their hand and say, hey, Nathan's playing foul, or, inuring himself or taking advantage of donors. And so that's the main differentiator is secular nonprofits. Like you said, Ordinary Movement is a secular nonprofit, so they have to file that informational 990. A church does not have to file that, which means, hey, at the very foundation, the accountability of that organization comes down to the moral integrity of its leadership. And humans will human. And what did you say about ultimate authority? You said a great line earlier.
What did I say?
You said
absolute authority absolutely corrupts.
Yep. And so it's not rocket science to see how and you brought it up, how the religious system in America has become the playground for corruption from a corporation standpoint.
But what do you say to the person? Because this is the argument that I would hear, and I can probably get on board with it a little bit. We don't want government involved in our churches, and we don't want the government's hand in it, because at the time that they're involved, now they can use it to weaponize or do like the Roman Empire did, right? Start controlling the nation through it, and we should have this separation. What's the response to that?
Oh, I had this discussion on Instagram with the gentleman yesterday. We'll start with what is a church, but then my response would be, at what point does your church become a business? Because if you are a business, you need to be playing in the sandbox, so to speak, that for-profit businesses play in. If you have coffee shops and clothing lines and TV networks and radio stations, you're a business. And I'm going to use the LDS Church as an example.
Yeah,
so
crazy.
The LDS is worth about $300 billion in net assets. They'll hit $1 trillion in assets in the next decade. When you look at, because churches love to use pie charts, to show where all their money goes. So if you look at the LDS Church in a simple pie chart, 30%, so $1 out of every $3 goes to something that even looks remotely like a church. So their temples, their wards, their BYU, a massive university, we'll call all of that church. $2 out of every $3 is strictly for-profit investment vehicles in the market. So just when you look at that math, 2/3 of this quote unquote religious institution is a for-profit business. That needs to be regulated like any other business. That is not a church, in my opinion. As soon as you hit that threshold where you are officially in the for-profit space, you're not a church. You're running under the guise of a church, but you are a for-profit business who might do a few things here and there that looks like a church, but you are a business. And so that's one side of the argument.
But aren't they taking the return on that investment and doing good with it?
No, the LDS Church does nothing with their returns. It sits in the market. And so that's what a friend of mine, David Nielsen, he blew the whistle. He was an investor at Ensign, which is the LDS Church's hedge fund. And in 2019, he blew the whistle because he said, hey, we've created this massive multi-billion-dollar Goliath, and none of it, not a single dollar of it, is being used to either help humanity or even for religious purposes. So all we're doing is acquiring wealth, and the only thing it ever did with its money was bail out another business that the church owned.
So what's their end game on that? I mean, what are they trying to do?
Well, their constituents and their tithers would say that they're trying to build sufficient resources in the storehouse. So with a natural disaster or the second coming, the church will have the financial resources to be the light of the world, or be the city on the hill. I think it's more along the lines of Lord of the Rings and, the dragon that acquires all the gold and will kill anybody who gets near it. And their prophets and apostles and presidents have said that exact thing. Look at, if you do not give your 10%, you will not be able to enjoy the resources of the storehouse when you need it. So that is not Christ-like. That's saying, hey, you give to us, and then if you need something, we might sounds very, communist, to be honest, is you pay into this and then we'll give you, we'll disperse. But so the LDS Church is the institution that scares me most in the religious sector. And it's because it's not controlled by one man or one family, right? Like I look at Kenneth Copeland, I have a lot of problems with how he runs his business. That business will die eventually, right? He'll pass it down to his kids. It's usually the second or third generation where the business deteriorates. Like that's a generational empire that's going to collapse. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is almost an autonomous machine. It is, that has no single person at the helm. So now it has become its own monster that absorbs just everybody and everything, and everybody bows to the whims of that monster, which is its investment fund. And so, not to take this off track, but that's where the LDS Church really terrifies me. Is it's not one man's ego that's at play, or one family dynasty that's at play. It's a massive conglomerate that that just like in the publicly traded world, like you are after profits. That is it.
So
but to get back to
what does it look like to make that okay? Like when is it okay? I guess I'm just trying to play through my head. Like let's say a church does get a huge endowment, right? And they have millions and millions of dollars and they're throwing off millions of dollars. When would that be a good stewardship versus what you feel like LDS is a bad stewardship?
Well, so the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will use that as a rationale. They'll say, hey, being conservative and having money in the bank is a good thing. I actually agree with that. But let's look at the Bible. You look at the Joseph story in the 7 years famine, like you need to lay up. The biblical argument would be potentially lay up resources for 7 years of famine.
Yeah.
The LDS church could live in perpetuity and not ever take a dollar again. So they've created such a robust investment vehicle that they could fund the entire global LDS institution in perpetuity off only a fraction of their interest gains every year.
So they could take some of that principle and start doing good with it today.
100%. And so that's where it's like, look at, I get being smart, but you could even look at some of these endowments of universities. Universities, a lot of these massive nonprofits can't even spend the money fast enough anymore. And that's something that the LDS church has a problem with is in their bylaws, it states that tithes can only be used for the expansion of the church. So that's temples, wards, physical expansion. They can't even get permits and, building layouts quick enough to build. That's why they're building so many temples, because they just have so much money now. They're just like, build it anywhere, build it everywhere. And so we've created these machines that are so cash heavy, which is the antithesis of the idea of Christ, and the idea of daily bread, and the idea of the Israelites in the wilderness, and the idea of faith, give us this day our daily bread.
Yeah, I was going to mention daily bread. I think it doesn't say
stockpile bread for the next 100 years until Jesus comes. It says, no, give us this day, right? And so the institution is antithetical to the very idea of faith because it's demanding everybody in their pews have faith and give out of faith. But then the institution basically says, I am sufficient. Mm-hmm. Let us disperse where we see fit. And ARC is the prime example of that. In the non-denominational spaces, that's their model. Like it's literally their model.
Hey guys, we're going to jump right back into this podcast episode, but first we wanted to take a moment to highlight Ordinary Movement. Because of Ordinary Movement's investment in this podcast, we're able to bring you this great content. Ordinary Movement is a disciple-making movement that happens through ordinary men and ordinary women who take the initiative and the high challenge, high grace invitation to be disciples who make disciples. Ordinary Movement provides a proven framework, a disciple-making process with a ton of resources that takes all the guesswork out of disciple-making and building community. Ordinary Movement is free and exists to help people just like you walk out discipleship in your own life. OM also helps local churches create a disciple-making movement in and through their church community. This process is simple, reproducible, and creates multiplication. OM was designed by ordinary people for ordinary people. That's people just like you. So to get started with this free resource and the platform of Ordinary Movement, please visit ordinarymovement.com. Once again, ordinarymovement.com to learn more. All right, back to the show. Okay, I want to get to ARC. I just want to say this because I think it could, and Chris, anytime you want to talk, if I have you on mute, please raise your hand or do something.
I do,
you want to talk
and
Go for it.
It goes to, you've had some really great quotes. You said, absolute power leads to absolute corruption.
Do you have any comments on that?
So in today's world, the organization is regulating the organism. The organism needs to regulate the organization. If you look at politics, when they mirror each other, right? And so Christians have to pick up their cross and follow Christ, which includes asking people some pretty tough questions. How's this money being used? And,
the problem with
demanding
that is,
answers on that.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought you were finished. Go.
No, I was just going to say, because over a period of time, someone's going to go, you know what, you're not being very authentic, and I don't feel good that I'm giving you 10% of my income, and you can't simply tell me how it's being used. That's not love. That's not respect. That's not kindness. That's none of that. And so at some point, they're going to go and look at what organizations are transparent and I'll know how my money's being used. And this is a $1 trillion river flowing very rapidly. And that river is just gonna get more aligned with Christ's purpose as the body of Christ, as folks pick up the cross and follow Christ, start asking these tough questions. So I'm not an advocate of, oh, hey, let's have the government run in there and such. No, like, let's step up. Let's stop waiting for an organization to come in and do it. Let's all step up. The body of Christ. Let's go.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say the problem with that is without the 990, it's very hard to ask that question, and then you get stonewalled. Mm-hmm. I had questions around that in the past, and anytime I even sniffed around asking it, it just created a really awkward situation, which we just got to get past as church congregants and realize that that's not part of it. I have a couple things on the LDS. One of you mentioned in another podcast I heard, which is fascinating to me because it's hard to. Our human minds can't conceptualize what $256 billion or $300 billion is. And even doing it this way, we really still can't comprehend it, but it makes a little more sense. The NBA can be bought 2.5 times. Every team in the NBA, think about, how much wealth is in the NBA. Every team can be bought 2.5 times with that money. Like, that blows my mind.
Yeah, it was twice last year and still have money left over. It's probably 3 now, or 2.5 now.
Absolutely nuts. Hey, let's talk about that. Well, first, I want to get to, you were heading down the ARC model. But can you give me some examples that you guys have seen, some of the most flagrant examples of abuse around not having to report on a 990, or even just maybe it's not even specific to that. Maybe it's specific, just like abuse within the church with a small salary and a huge housing allowance or things of that nature. Can you speak? Because I think those are the things that the people listening to this podcast are going to be like, wait a minute, my pastor says he's only making $80,000 a year, but he lives in a $800,000 house or $1 million house. How is he doing that?
Got to watch out. Nathan got arrested asking those questions.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's just, like humans will human, right? Absolute power absolutely corrupts. And so Phil Hackney, he says, when you don't tax something, you're creating an incentive for people to play in that space, right? And so even in the nonprofit space in general, right? That's an untaxed space. Even if you file it on a 90, remember in 1913, there was only 12,000 organizations that checked that box. Extrapolate that out over to 2025, there's 1.9 million nonprofits in the US now. 1.9 million. And the argument against that and the pushback against that will be, well, Nathan, population increase for sure. Okay, let's map that against population increase. If we kept those numbers similar, it'd be about 45,000 nonprofits today.
Oh, wow.
There's 1.9 million. And so you have to ask why. And then the explosion in the registration in the nonprofit sector, this includes churches, always comes off the back of technology booms. So you see a massive spike when radio came in. You see a massive spike when TV. You see a massive spike when internet. And you have to ask, why is that? Well, guess what? Every time there's a technology boom, it means you can add 1 to 2 zeros on your audience reach. If I became a pastor, if I wanted to be a pastor and I built a little love den, a little building, in 1913 for my local community, there might be 200 people that showed up, and that'd be a successful gathering, right? That means if I preached tithing, which odds are they didn't preach tithing back then, and this is a fascinating subject as well. Odds are they didn't preach tithing back then. I could only take advantage of those 200 people, right? Because that was my reach, that was my influence. Well, radio comes about, boom. Now instead of reaching 200, I can reach 20,000 people in my local radio network. Okay, cool. Now my audience is bigger, which means I can potentially influence and get more money from more people. TV comes about. Now I can push that to 200,000 or 2 million people. Now you have internet. Man, my reach is 8 billion people if I play my cards right. Right? So everybody just wants to get into the game, and that's where the nonprofit sector explodes. And remember what Phil Hackney said. He said, when there's not a tax, it gives incentive to play in that field. Yeah. So now move from the secular world to the religious exemption world. There are far more opportunities to move money and use money in untaxable ways in the religious world compared to the secular nonprofit world. And housing allowances are one of those. And so you have to look back into the history of this idea of a parishioner, like a parrot or like a parishioner's house. I'm sorry, a parsonage or a housing allowance. Like you have to track the history of that. And as clergy wanted to have families, the church would build a little house next to it for the pastor or the clergy member to live in. Well, then you extrapolate that out to 2025 and you have pastors pastoring churches in Washington, but they live in Los Angeles. The CEO of the church in Washington lives in Montecito, California, the most expensive place in the world or in the US. That sounds a lot like the CEO of Starbucks, not the quote unquote CEO of a church. And
that's actually happening, Nathan.
Oh yeah.
What church is that?
Church Home, Judah Smith's church in Washington.
Oh, that's Judah Smith's church.
Yeah. So they've recently let go of that CEO. But yeah, they bought him a multi-million-dollar home. I think it was about $4 million. The church bought him, so using donor funds. And then they gave him $1 million to remodel the house. They spent $1 million plus on just remodeling the house. The gate alone in the front of his house, I heard, was $80,000 just to install the gate. And so this is the CEO of a church, who's 1,000 plus miles away from the location of the church. Yeah. And so that's just a loophole. And right now you could take a housing allowance and there is no legal guideline on how close that house necessarily has to be to the church. So we see this, we call it long distance ministry in the show. What we've also seen too, is if I have a church in Texas and I love fishing in Florida, well, I'll just bring under my umbrella a small church in Texas, let's say a struggling 50-person church. We'll kind of acquire that church, bring it under my umbrella. And well, now guess what? Now I need a house in Florida too.
Yeah.
And so it's businessmen. And I'm sure you understand this intimately. When we put capitalistic business-minded individuals at the helm of religious institutions, that church or that religious institution is going to mirror capitalistic, growth-oriented, profit-oriented companies. It's not rocket science, and that's just what's happening. And again, to Philip Hackney's point, when when something is not taxed, you're giving incentive to play in that space.
Yeah, I mean, it's just human nature. It's a path of least resistance. You're going to take it. Now, it's sinful at times. I think my issue, and I don't know if you guys would agree with this or not, but I don't have an issue with a pastor that's leading a huge church making a large sum of money. What I have an issue with is not the congregation not knowing it.
Yeah.
And then portraying it as if, oh, I make this salary of, let's just say $150,000 a year, and I'm running a church of 30,000. That sounds very modest. But then they don't tell the rest of the story, and that's the problem with the No 990 reporting. Mm-hmm. And if the congregation wants to pay their pastor $1 million and it's all disclosed and everyone knows about it, and they still want to give to that congregation, then have at it. I don't have a problem with the pastor making money. The problem that I have, and I just wonder if you guys have the same feelings that I do. You may have a problem with the pastor making money, period, and that's fine. But I just think if there's, it's just never known. It's nobody really knows what's happening, and it's so shady to me. Mm-hmm. And I think ultimately what I think happens is, if people knew how much was being made, then ultimately pastors would be paid what they should be paid, and not millions and millions. And who knows? I don't want to get into that argument. It's more about transparency to me.
Yeah. I think you have to separate the two, right? Because theologically, I don't see rationale for honestly pastors taking a full-time salary. That's my personal, after my years of research, after talking with theologians all over the world, after talking with scholars, I'm not against it, but you have to make some pretty big theological leaps to justify a modern day salary. And being this idea of full-time ministry. With that said, Chris and I do not care. Like Stephen Furtick, if you're making $20 million a year, we don't care. Like you said, as long as, because you are running a corporation. And this is my favorite part, is you have filed corporate documents with the state. You are a business. You are not a church, in my opinion. You are a nonprofit corporation. It's in your title. It's on the document you filled out. So let's call a spade a spade. You're a corporation. So if you want to make 20 million and you think you deserve that, that's on you. And to your point, Jeremy, as long as your donors, the people paying that salary, know it, and then also know if you take a housing allowance, also know if you and your wife and your kids' cars are on that, payroll and getting car allowances. If you're getting clothing allowances, like just let them know, because a lot of times, we know pastors with multiple bulletproof cars and they're all paid for by the church. And I guarantee you, none of those congregants know that Range Rover or that Maybach or whatever it is paid for by donor funds. You're going to say, it's like you're going to figure out a way to spin it. But no, that church is paying. If the church is paying for that vehicle, they need to know what they're paying for. And I don't think that's rocket science. And I don't think that's not a big ask, but for some reason in the religious space in America today, it is a big ask.
Hey, it's not rocket science at all, but you don't know.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. No, and they tell you one thing and then it's another. Mm-hmm. And this is where I'm just tired of keeping my mouth shut most of the times. But the other thing that chaps me, like, let's look at Stephen Furtick, right? Like, not to pick on a person, but why not? Mm-hmm. I've heard him say publicly that my mansion of a house, which he has a mansion, right? Mm-hmm. He does. I've seen pictures of it. The church, I did not pay for that from church salary. Mm-hmm. I paid for that through speaking engagements and book sales. Mm-hmm. And this is where I really get upset. Mm-hmm. Is the reason he has book sales is because of the platform that was given to him as from being a pastor.
Yeah.
And the reason that he has speaking engagements is because he's taking off time of speaking at his own church to travel across the country to make $25,000 to speak. And they make more than that at times to speak at another church. And the reason he has Rolexes, and there's a term for it that I won't use here, but it starts with circle, is because all these pastors, you come to my church and speak, come to my church and speak, and then I send you a gift in the mail paid for by my church, which is a Rolex or $500 sneakers or all these other things. And I know it because I've seen the sausage made. Mm-hmm. This isn't speculation. I've seen it. People like John Gray that's cheated on his wife multiple times. And I just say that because it disgusts me, because he goes on stage and buys his wife a Lamborghini and says, the reason I was able to afford a Lamborghini, or I don't remember what it was, some high-end car. He addresses his congregants and says, it wasn't from the salary, it was from my book sales and speaking engagements.
Yeah.
And there's no business in America that allows you to create a platform for that business, with that business, and then says, hey, you create your platform with my business, but then you create NathanFL.com on the side, and you take time off of work, that paid time off work, and you go make millions at the expense. No, like with my heart with Ordinary Movement, and I'm writing a book right now, I'll probably sell 2 copies, but
I'll be one of them.
If that thing ever sold millions of dollars, every dollar goes back to Ordinary Movement, because that's why I'm here.
So this is a big deal. And this is why I always ask, is a church a business? And the answer is yes. And if anybody says no, they're sniffing glue, and, they've bought the Kool-Aid, because they filed corporate documents. They are a business. If I work for, let's say, Fox News, and I'm an anchor on Fox News, and I do something while I'm working for that corporation owns everything I do. So a great example is Julie Roy's, right? Like she was on Moody Radio. She couldn't go off and start another radio station and at the same time and glean off that. Moody would own that channel, if that makes sense. Like, hey, we're paying you a handsome salary for 40 to 60 hours of work a week. Whatever you create in the interim, we own. But to your point, since we can't call a church a business, a pastor can build a brand, can leverage that platform and write
that God gave him.
That God gave him.
For the purpose of that church.
Correct. And then they'll write a book. And sadly, a lot of times to get on that New York Times bestsellers list.
No, they do small groups, and they say everybody that buys the book will buy it at cost and buy it this week and buy gifts for your friends. And that week they become a New York Times bestseller. And now they leverage that the rest of their life to get speaking engagements and sell more books.
Yeah. Or The church just buys 10,000 copies and sits it
Even
in the
worse.
basement and gives it away for free as the free gift for visitors. And it drives them up that value chain. And so Philip Hackney, and I'm going to go back to Phil because we will always fall back on the law because these are corporations. Phil Hackney says this is such a thorny part of the nonprofit sector for them to even touch because, it's called the inurement. And so when you better yourself, basically, and you inure yourself off that nonprofit, that is illegal. But the terms are so gray that's how a lot of these pastors are able to get away with it. And you don't really see many secular nonprofits doing it because they'll get slapped. But since the financials are opaque, you build massive brands and celebrity under the guise of, hey, my church, to the point where you just leave the church. You're like, I'm so big now that I can't focus on that church. I'll hand it off. And it's so bizarre to me. But to your point, the model is so broken. And you see this, and I'm going to go back to ARC. You see this with a lot of ARC churches. They want the most charismatic, loud man. If you can sing and dance and pastor, you're going to be on that stage. If you can play a trumpet and pastor, you're going to be on that stage. It's bring all your skill sets to create this performance and production and leverage it to the now you can leverage even offerings. I can bankroll offerings. Hey, bank, I make $3 million a year in revenue off my givers. I want a loan for $25 million. I'm going to leverage my congregation for future giving so I can build the building I want. And
I know it happens because I've been part of that.
Yeah.
And the thing is, listen, if you want to write books and do speaking engagements and have New York Times bestsellers, awesome. What if all that money went back to the congregation? Mm-hmm. And then the board said, assuming we have a board that is legit, the board said, hey, Nathan has brought in millions of dollars that he's doing, and he's a great leader. Let's increase the salary. Mm-hmm. Let's make he can make $500,000 a year, or let's increase his, and it's all above board. Mm-hmm. The problem is, and it just becomes a hard issue, as we all know. And at some point, like, when are you as a pastor okay with the fact that that you are profiting on the side? Like, they know it. They know it. Yeah. I don't care who they are. They can play dumb all they want. They know it. They know exactly what they're doing. And it's disgusting.
Yeah.
To me.
I totally agree.
Yeah. So what about Chris, hit us, Chris. Sorry.
If you were going to ask something, I got a question just that's in this arena that we're talking about that I wanted to throw at you and get your thoughts on.
Yeah.
So, like, we talked earlier about like the mirroring between politics and the institutional church, right? Like, thought, like, whenever you're talking about like politics and such, I think most people would agree that term limits are something that would be great to have, especially in like the federal jobs, the federal, like, Senate and House. Do you hear that argument a lot?
In politics?
Yeah, about politicians having that.
Yeah, for sure.
And usually the reason why that conversation's going, because like over a period of time, they are no longer like for their constituents first, because after a period of time, that system eats them up. Yeah. So in the same way, should there be career pastors that are getting paid versus like maybe like somebody that does well as a pastor and then goes off into the business world and continues pastoring on the side or making disciples and such, versus just being a career pastor for the rest of their life in that system? Because will the system eventually eat them in today's system?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a sticky topic for sure. I do think I've heard it said, a great leader moves over so the Holy Spirit can move in, so the congregants can move up and the church can move out. Mm. And if every leader had that in mind, I need to move over so the Holy Spirit can move in, so that others can move up. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they shouldn't be a pastor their entire lives, but maybe it should look like a different expression throughout their lives as they allow others to take. Our goal as Christians, I believe, it's discipleship 101, but it shouldn't end in the church. It should be modeled in the church. is to build up leaders, have them become self-sufficient, and then launch them into the world so that they can do exactly what you taught them and trained them to do. So yeah, I mean, I think in a sense, I agree with what you're saying, Chris. I think there's some validity to that.
There's an interesting, I'm always going to try to take it back to the foundation. I think there's an older gentleman who was raised in the missions field overseas, was a pastor his whole life. And he came to the conclusion that not a single person who's in the system for a career will ever be able to make it through without being corrupted by the system in regards to quote unquote church. And here's why. As soon as your livelihood is dependent off the tithes or generosity of others, and the system is expensive, so the building, the overhead, the operations, everything you present is going to be to protect that institution that you've built. And to your point, you'll justify it as many ways as possible. You'll point to scripture and throw a couple scriptures on top. You'll sit around with friends and debate, and everything though will steer towards protecting the cage you've built. And I'm going to use an analogy, an experience I had. So I firmly believe God has given me breadcrumbs throughout this whole journey that's led us to this conversation with you. I was in Brazil, in the favelas in Sao Paulo, and the favelas are basically the slums of Brazil. And one of my Brazilian friends was like, "Hey, I want to take you to the coolest seminary you'll ever see." And because everywhere I traveled for 20 years around the world, I'd go visit churches and seminaries. I just loved it. And these experiences helped craft the religion business. And we're driving through these dirt roads, and we get to this rundown, what looks like just simple homes. And there's this probably 70-year-old white dude sitting there. And I go and have lunch with him, and we eat beans and rice. And churrasco is what they call it, and just a bunch of different random meats. And I'm like, "Tell me your story." And he's like, "I was born and raised in Texas, moved down here with my wife when we were in our 20s, and I had like $2,000. And he's like, "I wanted to spread the gospel. I went to seminary, didn't like how the seminaries were kind of creating pop outs, and they were telling me to go down, have mission or have donors sponsor us." And he's like, "I didn't want to do any of that." So he's like, "I went to Brazil. We rented a small studio apartment, and I bought a brick making machine." And he's like, "I just started making bricks. And the machine cost about $1,000. And he's like, I would make bricks, and I would go into the market and sell the bricks and just preach the gospel as I was selling bricks." And he's like, all these street kids would always come up to me, and they just loved hearing about Christ. And he's like, "I took one street kid in, and I said, I want to teach you the gospel. I want you to come live in my studio apartment, and we're going to make bricks 3 hours a day, and I'm going to teach you the gospel." And but by selling these bricks, he was able to buy a little property on this kind of remote hill. And he built this tiny little, bunkhouse basically out of the bricks he would make. And he'd bring a couple more kids in, and he would preach the gospel, and all these kids would be making bricks and preaching the gospel, and he'd send these kids out. And flash forward to when I was there, so 40 years later, and there was a couple hundred students, all orphans or street kids, learning the gospel, making bricks, and going out into their communities. And what he would do is so there was brick making, mechanic. They had a mechanic shop at that point. And so they would teach every child a trade and the gospel. And they'd send them out to say, "Hey, you're going to make bricks and preach the gospel, or you're going to fix cars and preach the gospel." For 50 years, this man never took a single dollar in donations. And he built the most robust, self-sustaining model of a quote unquote seminary I'd ever seen. And when I walked in there, the rocks cried out, man. I mean, like every single bit of this seminary, this building, this thing he'd created, just screamed and reeked of Christ. And I was so proud of it. I actually went down and filmed it for the original show we shot when I was 28. And but when I had gone back to film for the religion business, so I went down there when I was like 24, went back down when I was 28, he had dementia. And so he had brought in one of his original students to begin to take over the seminary. And they invited me to dinner at his house now, not at the original guy's house, the American's house, but at this Brazilian's house. And he had tiled his house in white marble. So the floors and the walls, and this is on the seminary property. And it rubbed me wrong. And I didn't know why. But it just, this house had become the nicest house on the property. It was no longer like, this is pastor's house here with his wife and kids, and this is the bunk houses. His house now had this shine to it. And I still filmed it, still loved, like, interviewed the original pastor, interviewed him, shot all around it. I went back 4 years later, so when I was 32, and he had TVs hung. Now, in his house, in the worship center's house, they had paved the driveway down, and I was just interviewing him again, and he said, "Oh yeah, we're taking in donations now." And I felt God completely leave that. Like, I could not feel God in that facility anymore. And the whole model is because he had started coming to America and visiting seminaries in America. And no longer were all the students required to learn a trade. They were just required to go to seminary. Yeah. And I'm like, I literally felt he, in one generation, had gutted this beautiful model that was strictly there to spread the gospel. And this is the big one, not be a burden on others, as Paul would say. Yeah. And instead, he took it as his right to take in donations from Americans, and no longer was there sweat, toiling sweat, so to speak, but we were teaching the gospel and spreading the gospel. And that singular experience over, I think it was about 8 years of my life, brought to fruition the religion business, because it became a business for this man, and it became a donation-driven business. And he would point to Malachi and point to the Mosaic laws and point to Melchizedek and say, man, we deserve people to give us 10% because we are spreading the gospel. And it was, I would say, the most profound experience of my religion business journey was to see something so pure and so organic that was strictly, that needed money to survive. This is the kicker. We're not saying money's bad. Chris and I have never said that. Businesses need revenue to survive. But this man had figured out a model to bring in revenues that unencumbered people to learn the gospel and spread the gospel, just like Paul had done. And in one generation, the model had been destroyed by, this is the big one, by the American model. Yeah. And then you see this happening in Africa now. And so I personally think the whole system, and I'm going to be the sledgehammer here, needs to be burned down. And we have built an institution on top of Jesus, and that institution is flawed in every aspect, from how it sees resources to how it defines itself to how it holds leadership accountable. And you look at Christ. Christ died, and then he was resurrected. Things are born. They have to die for new life to resurrect. The seed has to fall into the soil and die to multiply. And that is that fractal based church. And instead, Gateway, your friend's church, is a prime example. That church is corrupted by the very ethos of its founder. It is a diseased institution, and that disease has to die. That cancer has to die, which means, in my opinion, that institution and those leaders should be like, hey, this is a tainted institution. Let it die. Let these thousands of brilliant, passionate Christ followers go into their communities, and new life will resurrect. But instead, they hold on to it. They say, man, we're $40 million a year in revenue. Hold on to this institution. Keep it alive. Keep it alive. Like, shock it over and over, inject it with chemo. Like, we got to keep this thing alive. And it's like, no, let it naturally die. And out of that death, beautiful things will resurrect. But we believe the institution is the church. And so we hold on to it and we strangle it, and it strangles, and there's a big one. It strangles out the joy that is Christ. And that's what Chris and I are really diving into right now and learning ourselves, is like the joy. There's no joy in the institution. The institutional model cannot promote joy. And to your point, like, the leadership the whole point is, as a leader, you get out of the way and send people out. Get out of the way, send people out. Grow them in their faith, and then send them out. But that is Chris, is that a good business model?
The sending them out? No, that's a terrible business model. You need to keep them in there.
You lose your tithe, man. You lose your tithe.
Yeah.
Yeah, how could you do that? Because we've come to believe as church leaders, and I'm not a church leader, I'll just say that somehow it's ours. Like it's ours to keep. Versus it's the kingdom of God's. It's a crazy paradigm. I never saw it until I got into faith-based nonprofit. When I was just as a businessman in the secular world, I didn't really notice it as much. But man, you get around people that are leading churches, they're called pastors, and they start acting as if they own the people. They own, like it's a real interesting, not hands open model, and it all comes back to this thing we're talking about, which is money. That's what it really all stems back to. I mean, some of it's pride, some of it's these other things, but it's really the fear of what happens if somebody leaves, what I do with my money. And there's a quote you said just a minute ago. You said that almost everybody, or I think you said everyone that is in the system long enough will be corrupted. And there's a saying that I love, and man, it's really powerful when you think about it. But it's hard to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon him not understanding it. And what we have is in the church today, we have a lot of people that have a salary that depends. They're not going to understand it because they have a salary that depends upon them not understanding it. Mm-hmm. Right. So the change when you say, and I got to be careful here. I got a lot of pastor friends. I mean, I'm not trying to tear the church down per se, but you said take a sledgehammer, burn it down. What is
the church?
Yeah, what is the church? Yeah, I know. I mean, it's so complex, guys. So complex.
It's not, though. Come on, Jeremy. I'm going to say.
But how do you tear it down? Like, what does that look like?
Burn it down.
What does that look like?
I'm going to be blunt. Churches should not be 501c3s. Churches, like, you have bought into a cage that has kneecapped yourself. You have kneecapped yourself from day one. Nowhere in the Bible does it say to file for corporate documents. Nowhere does it in the Bible to say to bring together this corporate institution.
What do you say to, I mean, every time I talk about this, it's, the local church is the hope of the world. The local church is the bride of Christ. Like that's what I hear.
They've misused and abused and cannibalized the word church for their own gain. Like, do not take the Lord's name in vain is not, Nathan, don't go say, God damn it. Like, yes, my language should edify my creator, but it's do not use God's name for your own vanity.
So you guys think if the church, as we see it today, the buildings, go sing, the church that people call church, if it all went away tomorrow, you think we are fine in our faith?
100%. I think we'd be even better. You want to know why? Because I'd have to pick up a Bible and actually read it. I'd have to sit on my couch.
I'm playing total devil's advocate. Yeah. What happens if people don't do that? Like, what happens if people don't know where to go? Like, how are people going to get their answers?
Oh, they will, bro. They will.
They're not picking up the Bible right now. I mean, the majority of the majority of Americans, it's a statistic. Vast majority of Americans have never read the Bible.
Yeah, it's called we have a lot of amazing mentors in our lives. Chris and I do that are guiding us and refine and helping us in our faith journeys. And I've had 3 of them in the last week say, go on an input fast, Nathan. And an input fast is cut out all music, all news, all pastors, all social media. We can't really do that because we're very active right now on that.
Yeah.
But what that forces you to do is just open your Bible and read it. It forces you to pray alone. And guess where God meets you? There's a great, Chris, you want to talk about the Stanford study?
Oh, yeah. I have a question on that. I want you to answer that. I just have to ask one question before you get there, because I'm afraid we're going to get past it. But Chris, I do want you to answer that. It's one of my questions. So you guys are not afraid that if churches across America are gone, that Christianity won't die?
Let me rephrase that. I got to pivot that question. We are not afraid if the institution and corporations that we call churches disappear, Christianity would not die. It would flourish. And here's why. It would unleash $1 trillion of generosity out into the world, as opposed to siloing an institution. So that means, guess what? I guarantee you, Chris would still be generous. I guarantee you would still be generous. I guarantee you most of those givers to the institution would say, my brother's struggling down the street. That single mother who I am so pro-life that we marched to Washington, you know what? I'll give her that $1,000 this week because she's having trouble putting food on the table for her child. Then all of a sudden, we actually become what those early churches and acts were, which was, hey, let's pool our resources from our surplus to give to the hungry churches and the impoverished churches.
So you actually believe the Bible when it talks about when there's persecution, the church grew rapidly? You actually believe that?
100%. Because
That
you're
was
in the
tongue-in-cheek.
wild. You're in the wild at that point, bro.
Oh, I know.
And that's the thing is if the institutions died tomorrow, I believe there would be the most radical, and I love how every megachurch pastor loves the word revival. There would be the most radical revival of authentic faith, because for the first time ever, most Christians would have to read their Bible alone. Most Christians would have to pray alone. Most Christian parents would have to teach their children the gospel, which means they have to know it. All of a sudden it becomes your own.
It's everything. It's everything I point people to. I mean, it's my mind can just go. Mm-hmm. Hey, what we're going to do, Chris, I want you to talk about the Stanford study. For time purposes, I've kept you guys a lot longer than I already should have. I'd like to do that, and then I'd like to talk about the difference between damming and rerouting, and then what you guys are doing to. You guys aren't just like angry people out here like poking fingers. You guys have a solution, which I love. That's what I love. I love that you guys aren't just pointing out a problem.
We're in it for the long
creating
run.
A solution to a problem. So that's right. So tell me about this Stanford study, and then let's transition into this Broken Shepherds app.
Yeah, so a large mega church out of Illinois hired Stanford to do this study. And this, I mean, you talk about a church that's got a ton of members, thousands upon thousands of members, and they wanted to know how one can strengthen their faith. So they do this very thorough study, and the top two things that came out: read the Bible alone and pray alone. And then as soon as you say that, someone will say, hey, you're trying to forsake the gathering. It's no. Like, think about this in terms of process. Reading the Bible alone takes discipline, and it's you doing it, and it's you having your own faith as a member of the body of Christ, talking to God alone, your creator, that connection. Then when you go into a gathering, you're adding value as a member of the body to other members. There's nothing more exhausting in the business world than spending money on a meeting and a gathering, and everyone's time is precious, and then someone's just there to be a consumer of content. They're not contributing anything. So it's fascinating, because it's not that's probably not what they wanted to hear. They probably wanted to hear, hey, worship music, more activities at the church, like things like that, right?
Well, I mean, Jesus makes it pretty clear in Matthew 6, is it 6:6? Matthew 6:6, he says, but when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who is seen, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. I can just tell you a testimony. When I started that practice, daily time in the Word, daily time in prayer, by myself, taking ownership of my faith and seeking the Lord in intimacy, like that is the key. Intimacy with the Lord Jesus. If we can have everything changes. Everything. Your life becomes different. And so I would say that study is spot on, man.
But what happens when you do that? Then you start walking into the institution and you go, this is opposite from what I'm reading in the book and what I'm experiencing when I'm in that intimate moment.
It's what happened in my life. That's why Ordinary Movement exists.
Yeah. So the system is antithetical to the very teachings.
Because I'm reading Jesus say, go make disciples of all nations, follow me, not obey just my commandments, but follow the ways of me. Mm-hmm. So when I see how Jesus walked, his rhythms of life, how he discipled others, how he put everything into 12, although he could have spoke to everyone in the world at the same time. Like when I look at his model and I say, well, why aren't we doing that in our churches today? Mm-hmm. Why is it about coming to watch one man perform and then we all clap and we feel like that we've done church? Yeah. That's not what I read. 100%. Well, you're right.
So that's the problem is you start questioning the institution. So what does a pastor have to do? I'll teach you this. Let me teach you the Bible from this stage, because I'm anointed, I'm ordained, you are not. And we're repeating the Vatican just 400,000 times across the U.S. now. We've built the same exact model.
Pastors are not, they're equippers, and we are the ministers, and we're supposed to be, they're equipping us to do the work of ministry. And we have the vernacular wrong. When we call a pastor the minister, we've got it wrong right then. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because they're the equippers.
Well, and the pastor has taken every title now. They're the prophet, they're the teacher, they're everything.
And it's right. I never thought about that.
Yeah,
You're
they're
right.
not that. They're not
Yeah.
that. And so it's a misinterpretation and outright misunderstanding, and then sometimes abuse of the scriptures to justify an institution built on the back of Christ. And Christ says it in multiple gospels. You've taken traditions of men, culture, and you call it doctrine. So what we call church is just a tradition of men, and we call it doctrine because we want to stay in the cage. We want to be that lion in that cage to live 14 years, and it is dangerous out there. So I'd rather stay in this comfortable cage and get milk my whole life as opposed to actual wild game, because it's hard to take down wild game. It takes a lot.
Well, Paul says you're still drinking milk when you should be on the meat.
Yeah.
Chris, tell us about the solution to this through Broken Shepherds, and we'll wrap it there.
Thanks, Jeremy. So you saw in the docuseries when you watched it, and Nathan's journey of going all the way back to when he was 25 and researching this industry, this sector, that there's 10 loopholes where a couple $100 billion a year just evaporate: fraud, waste, abuse, and immurement. So that's the problem, right? We mentioned it earlier. You have 990s of secular nonprofits, and then you have, which even has some loopholes there. And then you've got religious organizations that don't turn anything. This is a very dark, you have $1 trillion flowing into a very dark system. So we needed to shine a light into these loopholes. So we created Broken Shepherds, which allows members, donors to get matched up and based on your interests and preferences and where you're located, various churches and secular nonprofits. And we pull 1.9 million nonprofits in. So 400,000 churches, 1.5 million secular nonprofits. They're all in the database. We scraped every state and the federal database. They're in there. So they would need to just go in there and claim their profiles and provide some pertinent data. And as they provide data, we talked about this earlier, Jeremy, where we're not the arbiter of a pastor should make $100,000 a year, $50,000 a year. How much should they make per member or anything? We just want you to provide it. Again, giving the power to the potential donor, the member, the congregant to make an educated decision. Like, yeah, this is where I want to give my money. I'm cool with how they're spending it. I'm going to give my money there. So it's equipping them, and it flips the table, right? Because we talked about it. This is a very authoritarian type structure where we need to flip it to where the members have the power. And so that doesn't exist today. Another powerful tool that's in there. And then you can donate right there on the spot. You can also volunteer as well, too, to any of these organizations. And, we'll spit out in today's era, we'll spit out your tax receipts at the end of the year to give to your CPA.
Oh, nice.
The body, and so we talked about this $1 trillion river, right? We're not damming anything. We want to divert it to the light. And those are people operating in transparency and are making disciples and taking care of the poor, the sick, the needy, and the marginalized. And impact is happening there. And so that won't happen until the body stands up, picks up the cross, and follows Christ and starts asking tough questions. And we also have the ability in there that, Jeremy, you can go in there to any church, nonprofit you know of, type in their name, and you can actually go in there and edit and say, it's like, think about it like a Wikipedia. You can put in someone's revenue, you can put in someone's salary, someone's housing allowance. It'll be unverified because the actual legal organization has to verify it in itself. But there will become a period of time where enough people rise up that river starts to shift to people who are actually picking up the cross and following Christ.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, I'll say it on the podcast. I want Ordinary Movement to be the highest ranking that we can get and the most transparent that we can possibly be on the Broken Shepherds website. We have zero to hide. So I say this because, I said some tough things. Some people listening are like, man, he said some. I practice what I preach. Like, you want to know something about OM, you can know it. You want to know how much we spend on cell phones? Zero. You want to know how much I get to the salary? Zero. You want to know how much goes to the cause that we say? All of it.
But even if that's the thing, though, even if I did,
yeah, it's
cares?
Fine. We have business. People have business expenses. We just choose to run it super, super lean. But that's fine if people have big salaries. It's fine. But man, there should be transparency, and it excites me to think. And you're right, Chris. I see it clearly. it's going to take an uprising, for lack of better terms, of people to ask for accountability, to ensure that this website makes sense, because it's got to have people have to be going there and demanding transparency. And when it does, this will really take hold, and the river will start flowing that direction.
But one thing we all do is transparency demands and brings accountability. Accountability brings reform, and reform brings impact. But you have to start with transparency. You can't jump to accountability or jump to reform. It's step one is transparency, you know?
Man, I would challenge anybody listening. I don't care if pastor or nonprofit. If transparency scares you, I would say what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like if transparency of your finances scares you, then you have to ask, there's a reason. There's a reason, and it's probably not a good one. Can you guys think of one good reason why you wouldn't want to be transparent with your finances in the nonprofit setting?
No.
So no, not at all.
Yeah,
you're hiding something if you don't, or you're ashamed of it and you don't want them to find out.
That's what blows me away. Like, Nathan, when you talk to these guys and they get all defensive, or they out of my face, or turn off your camera, I'm like, man, I would love for you to come to Ordinary Movement. I'll be like, come in. What do you want to know?
So I'm going to end my rant on this. You know, one of the most well-known Bible verses in the world is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish and have eternal life, right? But most people don't read verses 17 through 21. And I'm going to skip 17 just for time. Or no, I'll read it. For God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because they have not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. And this is the verdict. Are you ready? The light has come into the world, but people loved the darkness rather than the light, for fear that their deeds would be exposed. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light. For fear that their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God. And so we see it as transparency is a light switch. The rats and cockroaches run. And then the ones whose deeds have been done in the light of God are already walking towards the light. We see that. I have megachurch pastors messaging me all the time. I have pastors that preach on TBN messaging me saying we're in full support. We have small pastors. So that's what I'm saying. There's good pastors that are megachurch pastors. There's great pastors speaking on TBN. For sure. There are cockroaches and rats at every level too. And so John 3:16 to 21 speaks plainly on this. And so the light is transparency. And so, it's going to take a few years for transparency to shake through the system. But, God willing, it'll happen, and the church will reform because of it.
Well, we'll drop this in the show notes as well. But how do we watch the documentary? And then how do we get to Broken Shepherds?
You just go to thereligionbusiness.com or religionbusiness.com, and you're able to to purchase the show right there. And it's a pretty simple process from there. And then you could save $5 on purchasing the docuseries today by downloading the Broken Shepherds app. But if you just go to thereligionbusiness.com or religionbusiness.com, you'll be able to get to Broken Shepherds or the docuseries. You can watch it through either one. And you can download it in the Apple Store and Google Store as well too.
Yeah, and
lots of avenues.
You can just if you want to just play with Broken Shepherds, you can find it in the Apple Store and Google Play Store. You don't have to buy the show. We do sell the show. We are a for-profit corporation, and I want to be clear on this. We think the nonprofit. I don't like the nonprofit jail cell, so to speak. We are a for-profit company, and what we do takes a lot. It takes money, it takes revenue. We have amazing editors, camera operators, developers, and so we are a business through and through, just like an institutional church is a business that has money coming in and money going out. So we kind of want to be the beacon of a new model moving forward, which is, hey, you could be a for-profit company and do amazing things for your community and the world as well.
Yeah. Well, I've enjoyed it, and I know you guys listening will. Hopefully we piqued your interest enough or angered you that you want to go watch it now. And guys, thank you so much. This was great. Chris, I know you had, it looks like you're on vacation and you gave us your time. It's amazing. Nathan, I want to catch up more with you about that bow in the background. And man, this was awesome. Thank you. And thanks for your work and your heart. I mean, you guys are putting yourself out there. That's hard to do. And so I just commend you for your bravery. That's really great. And
thanks, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everyone watching, thanks so much. Until next time, let's do this. Hey, thank you so much for checking out the show today. I want to invite you to check out this next episode right here, where we're going to be going even further into discussion on what it means to be a disciple who makes disciples. Also, be sure to subscribe to our channel right now if you want to continue the journey of learning what it means to be a disciple, how we make disciples, what is discipleship, and just different ways that people are engaging and living as mission-minded believers. Finally, again, if you're wanting to go to the next level in disciple making and you're looking for support, resources, a framework, a discipleship process, and even training and coaching on how to be disciples who make disciples, check out ordinarymovement.com. Once again, ordinarymovement.com, where we have an entire process to help you create a disciple-making movement in your community and or through your church. Thanks so much.